I'm your host, Sam, and we will be speaking with a cybersecurity analyst today. If you're new around here, the Nerd for Life podcast is a STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, career-themed podcast. I bring on friends who work in STEM-related career fields, and then I pick their brain on various topics related to their line of work. So, without further ado, I'll let Josh here introduce himself, or as I like to call him, Bart sometimes. So if you hear me call him that, that's why. So, go ahead, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. So my name's Josh Bartholomew, and as Sam alluded to, I know him through the Air National Guard, and so out there, lots of people like to call you by your last name. Well, Bartholomew is kind of long, so folks shorten it to Bart. But yeah, I work at a company called RealTruck. We're a small e-commerce company. We sell pickup truck parts, stuff like those running boards, the steps that you use to get up into your pickup. And so I'm a cybersecurity analyst here, and I work, kind of doing lots of different things to make sure that if you were to order a part off of there, that your parts or that your credit card stays secure.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on today, especially with the world we live in today. Cybersecurity is such a hot topic, so I'm super excited to have you on. So what are some of your main responsibilities as a cybersecurity analyst?
Yeah, so because I'm in a small company, it's a lot of different stuff, and so I almost have to be kind of a jack of all trades. I'd say that kind of the big thing that I do, drop everything and go do this is incident response and investigations. So if we have something fishy that shows up in our network, I'm going to be going and looking at various we call them artifacts, or indicators of compromise, things like that, that basically just show me what a bad guy might be doing in our network, if it is even a bad guy. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just weird stuff is going on. Other stuff I do is pay attention to the world of cybersecurity. So we call that threat intelligence. Basically, it's like reading news stories. So that's like open source intelligence, but there's also those, like I mentioned earlier, those indicators of compromise. So I don't know how techie your audience is, but like IP addresses and different hashes of files, things like that. Those would be indicators of compromise. And so pulling those into kind of our automated systems, being able to keep an eye out for that stuff. Some of the other stuff I do is vulnerability management. You get those patches on Windows, like, at least once a month. And so part of my job is to make sure that not only are we getting those patches in, but that they're getting installed in a timely manner on all of our different systems. And then we do audits just to check that, make sure that we're doing what we say we're doing. Policy is a big part of cybersecurity. And then I'd say cloud engineering is a big part of my job too. We operate in a couple of the big cloud platforms, and so just understanding how the security piece fits into that, so that we can build security into our architecture is really important.
Sure. Cool. So what does a typical day then, or typical week look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balance. On some days I'm watching weird activity, and other days I'm not seeing any weird activity, and so I'm slammed with meetings or working on different projects, trying to make sure that our security posture gets better over time. That's a big part of cybersecurity too is something we call defense in depth. So you don't just put up one fence; you want to put up one fence and then another fence and then another fence and then another fence. And if your bad guy has to hop over all of those fences, he's going to take a lot longer to get into your network, or even just give up at some point.
Sure. So I know we kind of mentioned that, cybersecurity is kind of a hot topic these days. What would be one common myth about cybersecurity that you want to just go ahead and debunk right now?
Sure, yeah. I don't know that this is as common a myth as I think it is, because I was talking with my wife about this last night, but she was saying, well, I don't think that. But from what I've seen, folks who are interested in getting into the cybersecurity career field tend to think that all of the cybersecurity jobs involve hacking. So we call that red teaming. But in reality, there are a lot of different disciplines in security, and you can specialize in a lot of different things. Like I mentioned, cloud architecture before. That's DevSecOps. If you wanted to do more like traditional like development work, there's opportunities for like application security. Or if you're more of a kind of a legal mindset, there's even opportunities there for like governance, risk, compliance, and doing kind of more of the emergency management type stuff.
Sure. What would you say then, like the ratio of red hat jobs versus like blue hat jobs, as far as, jobs that tends to be more on like the offensive hacker side versus being on more of the defensive security type side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the company that you're in. There's some big security consulting companies out there. I do know of specific organizations, larger organizations. Citibank, I think, is one of them, that do have red teams in their on staff. They don't outsource that, but for the most part, if you're looking at jobs, it's mostly blue team type jobs, so the defensive type jobs. What the ratio is between, like, say, like a SOC analyst, where you're so a security operations center, you're going to be looking at all of those alerts and things like that, and making sure the bad guys aren't getting in. That ratio to somebody that's doing more like your traditional engineering stuff, that's tough to say. I would say it's probably about a 50-50 split, maybe a little bit more skewed towards the engineering side. Sure.
Okay, cool. So what do you like most about your work?
It's one of those sorts of things where, to be a good security professional, you really have to play with lots and lots of technology. And so I find that I have to be on the cutting edge of like everything. So there are days where I'm playing around with Docker containers, even though that's not a core function of my job, just so that I can understand, what's going on. How would a vulnerability affect this? How might a bad guy use this to his advantage? A lot of cybercrime and a lot of hacking is really just taking a technology that's been designed in a particular way and then manipulating that in a way that doesn't match that. If you've seen that like that TikTok video where it's the lady next to the different shapes, like the kid's toy, and the guy takes all of those different shapes and puts them through the square hole, like that's hacking right there.
Sure.
And so that's kind of the mindset that I have to get into, and I really enjoy that aspect because it's always a different problem for me every day.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good way to explain that. So then, what do you least like about your work?
It's a new career field. It's about as it's maybe a little bit older than I am. And so when you think about career fields that have been around for a long time, like accounting is thousands of years old,
Right.
versus something like cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is really, really young. And so because of that, we're still making stuff up a lot of the time. A good example is I'm reading this book, IT Security Metrics, and just trying to figure out how to do like reporting and understand how do we say, we're doing good security versus we're not doing so great on security. Like, if a business were to report that, oh, our revenue is down, like you can start to see, okay, well, that's maybe the business isn't doing so hot there, but we still haven't quite gotten there on the security side of things. We're still kind of figuring that out. And it's a challenge sometimes to have to deal with how that's working.
Sure. Sure. So then, what are some kind of problems that you have to deal with?
Um, yeah. So as I mentioned, how secure are we? That's when we think about like what a business leader wants to know, because that's really what security is. It's a function of a business, unless it is the business, like in the case of those security consulting companies. But ultimately, my job here at RealTruck is to make sure that RealTruck's business continues. And so that's going to be the question: is how secure are we? Are we protecting customer credit cards? And so that gets into risk. And risk is this big question of, how do you handle this? We have kind of a quasi mathematical equation that we use. Risk is equal to threats times vulnerabilities. The way that I like to say it is that risk is someone taking a threat, using it against a vulnerability, and enacting that on assets. And so what does that mean? That's a lot of fancy words. If you've got a credit card number and it's sitting on, say, an e-commerce website on a server, that's your asset. Okay. If that server has a way to get into it, in the news lately was Log4j or Log4Shell. This was a problem within the logging system on a lot of applications that use Java. And so a bad guy was able to basically like create a special request that when it got into Log4j, it would just like break the whole thing and allow them to do whatever they wanted. And so so that's a threat, and acting on acting on a vulnerability to compromise an asset. And so that's ultimately that's the problem. Is I'm trying to figure out how to break that chain in there at some point. Like, how do I make the asset unavailable, or how do I get rid of all the vulnerabilities, or how do I detect the threats? Those are kind of the problems that I'm having to deal with.
Sure. And then when you're facing some of those problems, what are some of the decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis, or the decision-making process of when with your job?
Yeah. So I'd see that a lot of the decisions are well. I mean, it goes back to that we're making stuff up. So it's what's the best approach to getting rid of this stuff. With vulnerabilities, for instance, there's kind of three big decisions that you make with a vulnerability. There's you can patch it. So let's take a Windows system that everybody seems to have, right? It gets the Windows update, right? For a business, that might involve downtime on a really critical thing. If this is the computer that runs a website, you want your website up all the time, right? The
Right.
web is always on. So, so in that case, if you get an update onto that system, you could patch it, but then that might mean downtime for that system. Okay, well, that's maybe unacceptable. So then the other option is to mitigate it, to kind of put things in front of it, and say, I'm not going to patch the system, but I'm going to make it hard enough to get to that vulnerability that it doesn't matter anymore. And then the other thing that you can do is you can just accept it. That goes back to that risk management side of the house, and everybody accepts some level of risk. You have car insurance, but you probably don't have like foam bumpers all over your car in order to keep you from hitting anything, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of, at some point you accept that there's a certain level of risk that you find appropriate. And so in some cases, a business might be saying, well, yeah, we understand that that's a problem, but the solution for it is huge. A great example I like to give is, what if a business is hit by an asteroid?
Mm-hmm.
Should we invest in a giant laser beam to blast the asteroid out of the sky? It's probably not something that a small company like RealTruck is going to be able to invest in. So that's one of those ones where we just kind of accept that risk and say, whatever.
Sure. So then, how does your specific position fit within your organization or company and the industry as a whole?
Yeah. So like I said, in a lot of small, medium businesses, the security team is small. I'm one of a two-man team, and that's actually a pretty large security team for a lot of businesses. I was at a conference back in October, and there was one of the talks. The guy asked, how many of you have a security person on staff? And I was the only one who raised my hand because I'm that guy.
Sure.
And so, I mean, easily another 30 businesses in the room, small businesses, and I don't have anybody on their security team at all. So in a lot of cases, what you see is that, like, in tech organizations, you do usually have somebody who is dedicated to that security role, just because they're dealing with it much more. And so that's where I kind of fit in there, is to be a resource to the rest of the organization in terms of bringing cybersecurity expertise. In terms of the career field, I'm really kind of think of me as like a networking sort of position. I'm able to reach out to people and know what all of these different companies are doing. If your viewers are interested in just taking a look at what a security company looks like, what kind of jobs that they have available. I was just looking at a Minneapolis-based company yesterday, Arctic Wolf, and they do what's called managed detection and response. We don't do business with them. This isn't a plug for them, but they seem like they have a really good business model, and so part of my job is just reaching out to folks like that and saying, hey, what are the services that you can provide me that allow me to not have to spend as much time on this particular aspect of security.
Sure. So I know we kind of talked about a little bit of hot topic stuff before. Maybe get into more hot topic issues. So what are some current issues and trends in the field that people should know about or be aware of?
If you haven't heard about ransomware at this point, I feel like you're like that guy in the Geico commercial where you're living under a rock. Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, man. And I think was last year that the Colonial Pipeline, that East Coast oil pipeline, got hacked, and that was the issue there. They got hit with ransomware. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but last year I think it was last year in Dusseldorf in Germany, a woman died because of ransomware. She was taken to a hospital, and the hospital got hit with ransomware, and they had to transport her to another hospital because their systems were down. And on the way, she passed away.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so we're starting to see like, you want to talk about like what is cyber security and the cyber world look like? It looks like it's going to start affecting the real world. So ransomware is a big issue, and I know that organizations like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that's part of the U.S. government, they're really starting to look at what are our critical infrastructures and how do we make sure that that if they get attacked, that these basic things can still run, like a hospital.
Right. Right.
So that's a big one. Related to that too is cyber warfare. You know, everybody's hearing about Ukraine right now, and so I would be negligent if I didn't talk about it too.
Sure.
So a lot of stuff that we're seeing on the cyber front is how cyber is entering into the warfare piece, and so like Russia and Ukraine are launching attacks at each other, and a lot of these things are what they're calling wiping attacks. So it's basically you're just hacking into a system, and then you're trying to find any data that's valuable, and you're wiping that out. You're erasing all of that information, so that it's harder for the opposing side to carry out its operations. So kind of like ransomware, but with less of a recovery option, you know.
Sure. Sure.
And I think the other big one that I would say for your viewers is just kind of this extortion / phishing. You know, a lot of phishing's been around for a long time, and it continues to be one of those big vectors. But kind of one of the more frequent trends these days is where somebody sends an email and says something along the lines of, you know, I caught you looking at dirty pictures, and so now you have to pay me a lot of money, or I'm gonna, you know, I took a video of you doing stuff that you shouldn't have been in front of your computer, and I'm gonna send this video to your boss and to your family and stuff like that. And so, you know, it's one of those where just don't do silly stuff in front of your computer, and you don't have to worry about that. But
Right.
But be aware that those are, you know, things that the bad guys do. They try and take things that you're not sure about and act on that. COVID-19 was used quite a lot in phishing campaigns, just to, you know, people are worried about it, and so they'll use something called a sense of urgency. Oh man, I want to I want to get the vaccine, or you know, I'm concerned about this legislation about mask mandates, or, you know, whatever. And so the phishers will craft an email and say, click here for more information. You know, you must do this in the next 5 days to be exempted, or whatever. Oh, yeah, I better do that right now. Click. Now you've got malware on your system.
Sure.
So those are the big things that we're dealing with is ransomware, phishing, and
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So what are some common career paths in this field?
So I think one of the things that you'll typically hear, you know, if you go to conferences and stuff like that, you'll hear folks talk about how they got into security by accident, and so that's kind of the initial aspect is how do you break into security? But once you're in security, I think the path is pretty straightforward. It's a lot of well, I was talking about like security operations centers. So there, you'll typically start off as like a triage analyst of some kind, and you'll just be basically looking at alerts and seeing, okay, does this need to be escalated to somebody with a little bit more experience, and then you'll send it up, and so as you gain experience, you'll move up in those ranks as an analyst. Eventually, you might move on to becoming a security engineer. That's going to be focused more on building what we call controls, or the English version of that is safeguards. And so what you're doing is basically figuring out what's, like I said, what's the best thing I can put into here. Maybe it's a firewall, maybe it's an intrusion prevention system, things like that. So that's more the engineering piece. And to some level, there's also architecture. If you're doing that on a large scale for an entire company, you might be an architect. And then eventually you get to like managers and executives. From the red teaming side, I think it's a little bit different. I don't know that it follows that exact path. So you'll have to have, I think, a red teamer on your podcast at some point to talk about that side of things.
Sure.
Yeah. And how to do that.
I know I've got two of my friends from ROTC who they are cyber officers for the Air Force that will be coming on. They got to get permission from their public affairs team in order before they can come on and talk about their jobs and stuff. But
sure, yeah.
So if you're a listener, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on those sweet episodes that we'll talk about. I'll do my little subscriber alert thing here. People can subscribe to the channel. A little call to action here. But yeah, so I guess then my next question is for like related fields of things that aren't exactly, a cybersecurity analyst. What are like some related fields that you think somebody would be interested in or consider looking into?
Yeah, there's kind of two different areas here. There's kind of more of a people and policy centric side of this, and there's more of a technology side. And so it really depends on what you're interested in. If you love people, but you're also kind of geeky and you like working with computers, there's lots of opportunities for like emergency management, or military intelligence, or law enforcement. Those are all really good. Even like lawyers. There's an organization out there called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and it's basically all lawyers. And their kind of goal is to promote privacy on the internet and protect individuals' rights, things like that. So if you're interested in going to law school and focusing on more the cybersecurity piece, like that's a totally an option. There's also, so I'll go back to the law enforcement piece. Every state has something called, well, I think every state has something called a fusion center. And so these are almost like law enforcement versions of, say, like military intelligence, where they're pulling in a whole bunch of different information. So you might be getting reports from local police departments within the state. You might be getting stuff in from the FBI, and you might be looking at your own cyber type stuff. But a lot of times these fusion centers, these are like responsible in some part to help secure or respond to incidences that happen to state organizations. So election security is a big one, right? You want to make sure that if your vote is that you put in your vote and it's on a computer system, that it's counted the right way and some hacker didn't change it, right? So part of that is like part of what fusion centers are trying to do is help out with making sure that that stuff is secure and not tampered with. If you're more onto the technology side of things, software development and system administration work very closely. A lot of folks actually end up in the security field from system administration. That's my background. That's how I got into security.
Sure. So then, back onto kind of your job. So how does your job affect your general lifestyle, or what's the kind of lifestyle of a security or cybersecurity analyst?
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. It's one of those where you ever been to the Grand Canyon?
Yes.
Okay, so it's pretty deep, and if you're looking over the edge, it can be kind of scary, right? And so at times, that's what cybersecurity is like. Like you're constantly looking at, gee, here's this one vulnerability, and if somebody were to exploit this one vulnerability, they're going to take down the whole operation, everything. It's just gone. And so at times it's a little bit terrifying, like having that knowledge and having to deal with, like, okay, I'm the guy standing between us and absolute disaster. But overall, I think it's a decent it's a decent job. Most of the time, I'm not looking over the edge. Most of the time, I'm just kind of working diligently and trying to make things better over time. And that's really, I think, if you're kind of a long game player, then you'll do well in this career field, because it's about playing that long game and just kind of working slowly and diligently to make things better. In terms of more generally lifestyle, it can be long hours. You can have, especially in a small company, you can be the guy on call. And if there's a cybersecurity incident, we had an incident a number of years ago, around the time that I started at RealTruck. We ended up having to work like 30 hours straight.
Wow.
Yeah, so it can be long days, but most of the time that's not the case.
Sure.
And I'd say that in terms of compensation for that, it's probably one of the best career fields. I've heard that software developers make better money, but depending on what you do, you can make almost as much as a software developer especially if you're at one of the big tech companies and you're doing some of their like more security operations focused type stuff.
Sure.
So if you're at Microsoft's like central threat intelligence command, you can make some really good money, and there's decent work-life balance in environments like that.
Sure. Yeah, I can totally see that. So then, would you say that a lot of the work that you do, what percentage is reactive versus proactive, as far as, reacting to a threat versus, setting up all of your ducks in a line so that way when something does happen, you're not scrambling to fix the issue?
Yeah, maybe about 60-40. And that depends on the company, really. Some companies have, really good, mature security programs. And so most of your time, you're going to be focused on building out those ducks in a row. I was mentioning I think I mentioned my buddy who used to work for UPS, and he worked in their uh, cyber operations department, and he so that their job is to respond to stuff. I don't know that he very frequently responded to stuff just because they had so many things in place. UPS is a very long-standing company. They've got a lot of stuff in place. So I think a lot of times he was really just building out new detections to make sure that if something did pop up, they were able to see it. But they had a separate team that was dedicated to just doing um, security engineering stuff and building in those safeguards so that you didn't even get to the point where you're detecting bad stuff.
Sure.
In terms of my job, um, because I'm dealing with both sides of it, I don't get to devote as much time to the security engineering side of things. And that makes it harder because then I'm not putting those preventative things in place. And so I'm having to respond to more stuff. So that's where I really have to rely on the rest of the IT team, um, you know, our infrastructure folks, our DevOps folks, who aren't necessarily security folks, but they do a lot of sort of work that ties in with security, and so a lot of that is kind of more me interfacing with them to respond to things.
Sure. Sure. What kind of accomplishments tend to be valued in and rewarded in this field?
Yeah, if you go onto Twitter, all of the rock stars, as we call them, they tend to be conference talkers. They tend to go to the big security conferences and provide just cool stuff that they've done. They share a lot, and I think that's really kind of the big thing is if you're somebody that likes to share, then this is a great career field because people value that. Like I said, it's really new, and so that's one of the challenges is we're all still trying to figure out how to properly get information to each other, and so those conference talks are really an important piece of that. Somebody says, hey, I found this really cool bug in this one system, let me show you how it works, and somebody else might be sitting in the room and going, I don't have that system, but I've got a system that's really similar to it. I bet if I do this and this, I can do that same thing. And so you'll find kind of a cascading effect where now all of a sudden we're able to fix all of these new things, these vulnerabilities or these concerns, just because somebody was able to, just because somebody shared it at a conference.
Sure. So then, what would you say the skills, abilities, and personal attributes that are essential to success as a cybersecurity analyst?
Yeah, the big one is just being curious. If one of the things I have to do is I'll be looking at something and go, I wonder what would happen if I do this, and just see, if you're filling up at the gas station, how many times have you just started pressing buttons on the keypad to see what it does? Those are that's the sort of mindset that really works for this career field, and that's more of the hacker side of things. That's more like being a hacker, but on the defensive side of things, especially if I'm in an investigation or something like that, a lot of times I'm sitting there going, okay, if I was a bad guy, how would I do this? What would I be doing? What are the sorts of things I would manipulate? And so just being able to kind of step into the shoes of the bad guy and work through that is a really important thing.
Sure. What's the profile of the person that was most recently hired at your job?
Well, I'm the person that was most recently hired. So I don't know. I don't know how to describe myself. Maybe probably not somebody that is only focused on tech. Being tech focused is good, but you also got to be smart enough to know how to work with people. And so that's one of the things that I've been really working at improving is understanding, like, not just how to communicate, but like how to talk about business. You know, I don't work for a security person per se. The guy that I work for does have a security certification, but that's not his full-time position. He's concerned with all of IT, and you'll sometimes find that security folks actually work for somebody in finance, and that it's part of the financial arm of a business. And so in a lot of cases, you might be trying to explain these really technical concepts to someone who's like, I don't know what a mouse is. And so just being able to kind of, I think for me, it's really important that I'm able to take these complicated technical concepts and turn them into business language.
Sure. So, what's been the most memorable moment for you in your career?
Yeah, so we had. Let me step back a little bit and talk a little bit about compliance. So, organizations that take credit cards, they as they take more and more credit cards and do more and more transactions, they have this thing called the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard that they've got to follow. So PCI DSS, or just PCI is what we call it. And part of PCI, as you get bigger and bigger, is you have to do something called a PCI audit. So a third party auditor comes in, a different person comes in and looks at all of our documentation, looks at how our systems are configured, and then says, yes, you're PCI compliant, or no, you've got 60 days to fix this, and this. And so we got to the point where we were big enough that I think we actually voluntarily chose to do a PCI audit, but we were getting to that point where, as we've been growing as a company, we've just wanted to kind of get into that rhythm so that when it is required, it's just kind of, this is an old shoe, let's just throw it on and get it done with. And so we went through that first PCI audit process, and I really worked hard to help build out our programs and things like that. And after our PCI audit, we got glowing remarks. Our auditor said that for a company of our size, that the security program that we had in place was one of the most mature programs that she'd ever seen. And so my VP came up to me and said, thank you for all of your hard work in putting this together. We nailed this audit. And for me, that was probably the most rewarding comment that I've gotten in my career.
Wow. Yeah, that's gotta feel good. So then, do you have any funny, embarrassing, and or interesting stories to share from your career?
I have two. I have two good ones. And not so much from my career. These are more, I think this illustrates just how much the career field has changed in the last 30 years. So,
Sure.
So Sam, you're an Air Force IT person. You've seen how much we lock down our systems these days, right? I remember being around 5 or 6, and my dad, who was an active duty officer at the time, he brought me into the office. So he's a logistics officer. And so he dealt with like ground fuels and stuff like that. So he had a little, they were in this small little building, maybe say maybe like 10 offices big, with a big common area, stuff like that. And so he and a couple other folks came into the office on a Saturday, and he had installed Doom on the work computers there and had networked them together. And so one Saturday on DoD systems, they're playing Doom. And so you can see, like, just in 30 years, that's a big difference there.
Right.
Um, you also went to NDSU. And so I remember having a conversation with a guy that used to work with my dad out at the Air Guard, out at the North Dakota Air Guard, where this guy Freddie, uh, um, said that he and my dad had found an old modem, and so they'd connected it up, and my dad asked Freddie for his student ID number, and was able to connect into the NDSU system and see what books he had checked out, see his
Wow.
grades, the whole gamut of stuff. And now, you'd be hard pressed if you don't have, like, a password and two-factor authentication, and you're coming from, an IP in the US, and all of these different things. So I think it's interesting, just from the aspect of where we were and where we've come to now.
Sure. Yeah, it's crazy to think how far we've come in just like not that long of a time, really. A decade or two. So,
Right. Yeah.
um, yeah. Did you share both stories?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So, how did you become interested in this field?
Uh, yeah. So my dad is, as I said, he played with computers way back in the day, and so there's always been a computer in my house since the day I was born. And I remember one of his favorite movies, and thus also one that I really liked, was War Games with Matthew Broderick. Have you seen that?
Nope, I've not seen it. I haven't seen a lot of movies, but
Oh man, no, you got to watch it, man. It's a great movie. So I'll just give you a quick synopsis.
sure.
Matthew Broderick is a high schooler in the 80s. He has this nice computer setup where he can do something called war dialing. So war dialing is where you start going through. This is back in the days when you had to have a phone number associated with the internet. Like, we didn't have cable internet back then, so you had your modem, and it was dialing different numbers to try and find other computer systems. So that's war dialing. And so he's war dialing and ends up stumbling. He's looking for this game company in Southern California, ends up stumbling upon a DoD system backdoor for something called Whopper. I don't remember what Whopper stood for, but basically, he gets into this system, manages to find a game called Global Thermonuclear War, and causes NORAD to go on high alert because they see a whole bunch of stuff coming into their system that looks like an attack from the Russians, a global thermonuclear war attack from the Russians. Okay. We're talking the height of the Cold War here. That's a big deal. Police chase him down, stuff like that. So I grew up with this image of hacking kind of in my mind, that it could do really cool stuff, but it was also really, really dangerous.
Sure.
So I liked that idea of hacking, but I didn't want to, I didn't want the police coming after me because I was about to start war with Russia. So
Right.
I didn't do a lot of that. And then I got into the Air Force, and was taking, one of the requirements for my position was to take the CompTIA Security Plus certification, or to get that. And so we took a boot camp. And I remember the instructor talking about how there were these people called penetration testers, and they were going into different things and hacking into systems and getting paid for this. And I'm like, whoa, time out. This is a legit career field. Sign me up.
Nice. And the rest is just history.
The rest is history. Yes. Yep.
So then, how did you begin your career then, going to the next step?
Yeah. So obviously I did a lot of time in IT with the military. Um, Started off kind of, the help desk type stuff, but also doing sort of more of the system administration type things. Working on those big servers and making sure um, that different software that the military folks needed, the intelligence folks needed, was available. And then I got a job in the civilian world here at RealTruck, and I was a Linux administrator. So again, doing the same sort of stuff, but this time, the Linux systems were what was running our website. So making sure that all stuff stayed up. And then it was kind of by accident that I got into security. It was, I'd been trying to work my way towards that for a while, but it was one of those sorts of deals where we had some security issues that came up, uh, and uh, and and in order to address those, we needed to start focusing on that. And so I just kind of started getting more and more security work added, and less administrative work given to me, and then eventually they changed my title because because they were like, it's more appropriate to what you do now.
Sure, sure. So, what was your school or training like for your job?
Yeah, so I've got lots of different kind of school and or training. There was the USAF Tech Control School. That's what got me um, into IT. So that was kind of more networking and doing. So if you think about, you're at your home, you have an internet connection that goes, to your ISP. How does your ISP get internet? Well, they have to do something called multiplexing, and they have to take all of these different circuits from everywhere and push them all into one pipe and then send that over to other people. And that's how you get information from one place to the next. So kind of think like going on an interstate, getting all these different cars, all these different roads, and getting them onto the interstate. And so that was what my Air Force school was all about, was understanding that those big networking concepts. Um, from there, I went to school part time for a long time to get a bachelor's in computer science, and that's also was really helpful. I think just kind of understanding how computers work, kind of in the nitty gritty role. And right now, I'm working on a master's in cyber defense, and so I'm looking at everything from like, how do you build the policy for a cybersecurity program, all the way down to how do you write uh, um, intrusion detection system rules. So Snort is kind of the big format for those. So how do you write Snort formatted rules? So a wide range of things.
Sure, sure. So then, how relevant was your school and training to your actual job? You know, a lot of times you go to college and it's somewhat related, but not entirely related to what you're doing. So, you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, so cybersecurity is one of those things where it's so broad that even innocuous things have some sort of relation to them, and can be related. Anthropology. You wouldn't think anthropology would be related to cybersecurity, but understanding like how communities operate, and to some degree even like there's a little bit of psychology. There's a great sort of subset of the cybersecurity world called social engineering. And so if you just look up social engineering, you can go find all kinds of stuff about like how to hack humans. How do I, get into a business? If I put on like a uniform and carry a ladder, can I get past security and go plug a USB into a computer somewhere?
Right.
And so So obviously stuff like the military training was useful from understanding how computers connect to each other, and computer science in general. Some aspects were more useful than others. I don't know that I've had to really deal with a lot of like hardware level type stuff. But if you're a person researching, well, what was the name of it? Meltdown Inspector. Again, if your viewers are interested in more the hardware side of things, these were big vulnerabilities in the actual architecture of chips, of computer chips, and so even that can tie in very directly into information security. So it's really one of those things where you can go basically learn anything you want. Maybe artwork isn't going to help out so much, maybe music, but it's good to have things to do besides security once in a while.
Well, I don't know about that. NFTs are becoming a thing now, so.
And it's true. NFTs are becoming a thing. Why did you remind me of that?
You're welcome. But yeah, after this podcast, I might try to squeeze a list of references from you and try to like add that to the description of the video. So if you're watching this a day or two after we broadcast, check down in the description below, and I'll try to get a list of references so people can go look some of this stuff up if they're interested. So
yeah.
We kind of already talked about this, but how did you begin your career, more focusing on a transition from school and training into your actual current job?
Yeah, so I was actually a part-timer in the Air Guard when I got selected for going to the networking school, and it was while I was at school that they basically said, we don't have quite enough full-timers yet. Would you be willing to quote unquote deploy to Fargo for a year? And I said, sure, why not? So I came back from school in March, and within another month, I was working full-time in IT. I'd say that in terms of some of the other stuff, the bachelor's was really kind of more just a nice cherry on top of my career. It didn't actually help like transition me to a new job or anything like that. And the master's has that potential to allow me to open up some new doors, but I'm also gaining that experience. So it's kind of both and, I'd say. But in terms of like when I actually started my career, I think that one of the big things that was really helpful for me when I did actually start working, just to learn things, and I really encourage anybody that's interested in this, go talk to old guys. We joke about okay boomer, but in the IT industry, those folks who have been around for 30 years like built the internet from the ground up, and there's a lot of stuff, the kind of the standards that we understand as being necessary for the functioning of the internet, the requests for comments or RFCs, some of those things are folks that these really old guys like built themselves. They commented on, they debated over, and so it's really great. I know for me, it was talking to those old guys who'd been doing this for a long time that really helped me to understand like how does basic stuff like border gateway protocol work, and when you understand those things, then it helps everything else make sense. Sure. And that's really important, because a lot of times what you'll find that somebody's taking advantage. This initial thing wasn't built with security in mind, and so we've had to bolt on security on top of it. and somebody might come along and find a way to manipulate that thing at the very bottom. And so if you don't really understand everything else on top, or if you don't understand that foundational piece, then regardless of how well you understand everything on top, somebody being able to exploit that fundamental piece makes your day a very bad day.
Right, right. Um, so then, how do most people get into the field, and like, what are some common entry level jobs in this career field?
Yeah. So I'd say these days, probably within the last decade, we've done a really good job as an industry of starting to create more entry level positions. Um, Things like SOC analysts, things like information security internships, stuff like that. So I think that these days, if you're looking to get into cybersecurity, it's a great time. It's so so much easier than when I was trying to get in. Um, Back 10 years ago, what you found is that most people came through some other avenue. And that's still a possibility. And I definitely encourage people, if that's something that you want to do, like by all means do that. You'll find that some folks get into information security or cybersecurity through IT work, like I did. Other folks will do it through finance. So they'll go and they'll become like a financial auditor, and then eventually that finance auditing kind of encompasses a cybersecurity element to it as well. And then they decide that they really like that, and so they kind of get rid of the finance stuff and just focus on the cybersecurity side of the house. And then the other kind of way that folks have moved into this career field from outside is through military intelligence, um, and typically, especially with uh, you'll find that a lot of the older folks in this career, they come from that military background. So if that's something you're interested, if you have the ability to go join the military, like that's a great opportunity to kind of open the door to a lot of later opportunities.
Sure, sure. So then, if somebody is really wanting to become a cybersecurity analyst, what are some of the most effective strategies for seeking a position?
Yeah. Have you talked about with I didn't watch the episode on with your security engineer friend, but did she talk about lead code at all?
I don't think she mentioned leak code at all.
Okay, well, I know that I've seen, kind of for developers, lead code is the thing, right? And so we kind of have our own version of that where you can go and kind of try out your skills, stuff like that. Hack the Box and Try Hack Me are both kind of hacking sandbox environments, or cyber ranges is another term for them. And In fact, Hack the Box, you have to try and figure out how to actually get into. You have to hack the invite system in order to actually get an invite into Hack the Box before you can go and start hacking actual boxes. So neat stuff there in terms of like being able to kind of understand how this stuff works. Also, I would say watch lots of videos. There's all kinds of resources out there. Um, if your viewers are viewing this on Twitch, I recommend there's a gentleman named MT Taggart, or Taggart Tech is what he goes by, but MT Taggart on Twitch is a really good resource. He used to be an educator, so he's really good at explaining like the cyber stuff, and he does like 3 different streams a week or something like that. So lots of great info there. If you're on YouTube, Black Hills Information Security. And they have all kinds of resources. They actually teach classes. So John Strand is the founder, and he teaches a number of classes that are pay what you can. So if you are strapped for cash, you're a poor student and you don't have anything, uh, you can still take these classes and get some great experience that will help you build the skills that you need in order to get a position in cybersecurity.
Cool. And speaking of Twitch, if you're not following me on Twitch, you should go down below. We got my link in the description, so go follow me there if you're not following me yet. So a little self promote there. So then, what's been one of your biggest failures in your career thus far, and what did you learn from it?
Uh, Man, I've had lots of fails. So I think one of the big things is not being afraid to fail. I wish I had been better at just trying things and letting them blow up in my face. Because I think I would have been able to make more mistakes over time and learn better from those mistakes. Um, so I'd say don't be afraid of failure. The other thing that I think I've learned is um, really communicating effectively. Um, there's a podcast out there, manager-tools.com, and these guys have been doing. It's a guy named Mark Horseman and Mike. I don't remember what his name, but they talk about how to be an effective manager. Now, maybe you're brand new to cybersecurity, you're not a manager of anybody, but in reality what ends up happening is you end up being kind of the focal point for a lot of different collaborations. And so just understanding how to interact with people, how to build relationships, how to influence their behavior in ways that gets them to view you as a team player rather than, one of the challenges that security always has is they're the department of no. No, you can't do that. And so to overcome that, one of the things that you have to be good at is kind of saying, I don't want to stop you from doing this. If you've got developers, for instance, that's one of the challenges that I tend to deal with. Is we have developers and they're developing things and they're building cool tools and they're not taking quite as much time as I'd necessarily like to make sure that they're getting security fixes into their code and stuff like that. So instead of being like you have to stop what you're doing and you have to go fix your security issues, instead it's more, what can I do to help you make this part of your workflow? Are there things that I can do to make this easier? Are there things that I can do that will just turn this into part of your process so that you don't even have to think about it? So learning those people skills, I think I haven't learned that as early in my career as I wish I would have. And so that's definitely a challenge too that I'm working to overcome.
Sure. Who would you say some of the most influential people have been to you in your career or in life in general?
Yeah. As I mentioned, my dad has always had a computer in the house. I remember him and I playing around with Knopics. If you've got any folks who are old time listeners or who are older folks who've been around a while, then they'll know what Knopics is and they'll know how old that is. But he also really set a good example. He always worked really hard and tried to work the best that he could, even if he didn't necessarily receive credit for it. And I think that lesson is really important and really valuable for the cybersecurity career field. I think Tim Jensen also would be somebody that I would put up there as a very influential person. So he's an IT guy and penetration tester here in Fargo, and he He's always got a fun story. If you're in Fargo, definitely try to find an event that he'll be at, because he's a great guy, and he seems to always be plugged into the cybersecurity community here in Fargo, and he's really who introduced me to the wider swath of people that are here doing cybersecurity work, and helped me feel like I'm not the only guy here doing this stuff. And then another guy that I've met through the Fargo cybersecurity community, Ian Leith. He and I have had some great conversations about how to go beyond looking at cybersecurity as cybersecurity and more as part of a larger business. How to understand that cybersecurity goals need to work with your business and enable the business, and make sure that like I said, don't be the department of no. Well, we can't give out any customer data because that's a risk. Well, but then the business couldn't function. So he really helped me kind of bridge that gap to understand, how do I make sure that I'm enabling the business while also addressing concerns.
Sure. What steps did you recommend someone to take in order to prepare to enter this field?
Learn how technology works. Like I was mentioning with the RFCs, like just Tim, for instance, will read RFCs. He'll just, like, a new RFC comes out and he'll read it, and he'll like try and see if there's something weird in there that he can get it to do what it's not supposed to do. And that's really what you need to do. You need to just play with a lot of technology and get familiar with it on a level where you can say, hey, I wonder if.
Sure. Would you recommend, are there any like trade journals or magazines or professional associations in which what could be helpful in somebody's professional development in this area?
Yeah, I don't know about trade journals necessarily, but Twitter is a great resource. If you don't have an account on Twitter, go make a Twitter account, and just start following like John Strand, and then from there, like, you'll be able to start picking up different information security folks. There's a lot of folks that do this thing called Follow Friday, and so they'll just have like a list of names of people that you can follow in the cybersecurity community, and it's great. I mean, there's all kinds of good information. It's Twitter, so you get the hot takes every once in a while too. But
Sure.
but overall, a great resource for getting lots of good insight and information. Folks will do like live tweeting at conferences and stuff like that. So even if you're not attending the conference, you can like pick up the bits and pieces of what's important with this new trending thing. The other thing that I would say too is there's a lot of Discord servers out there, and so really maybe plug into the community through those, and find different folks who are doing all kinds of different things. And then everybody talks about, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but one of the big conferences that you hear about is DEF CON out in Vegas in the summertime. But you can actually find some really great security networking just at like a local cybersecurity conference. There's one down in Madison, South Dakota, once a year, that has some great training, and has some really smart people that come to it every year. When it's not canceled because of COVID, stuff like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, just in the North Dakota, South Dakota area, Minnesota too, like there's probably easily a half a dozen different cybersecurity conferences that are really great, that have all kinds of um, good information. And if you're a student, oftentimes they'll give you a ticket for free.
Cool. Um, if you could do it all over again, would you choose the same path for yourself? And if not, what would you change?
I would change one thing. I would have focused more on development work. And I couldn't have predicted this, 10 years ago. But a lot of IT work is actually shifting to something we call infrastructure as code. Um, so there's a format out there called JSON, Java Structured Object. I don't remember something. But basically, it's fairly easy to read. It's like a bunch of curly brackets with information in it, and so it'll be like a key and then a value. And so, like if I'm describing a car with JSON, I might have like make, Subaru, model, Outback, color, green, and so you can kind of structure. You can structure data in this way, and then what you can do is in the infrastructure as code world, you can actually take and describe computer systems and feed that into what's called an orchestrator. And so that orchestrator takes this JSON that you've got, or YAML is another format, but it's basically the same thing, and it will spit out a virtual computer for you, and you can get complex enough to where you're building entire networks with this code. And so I think from a security standpoint, that's got all kinds of great stuff to it, because you can create a template that says this is a secure network, and then you can hand that off to somebody who's going to develop more of the application side of things. Okay, now I'm going to stick in my Python or my PHP application into here, and it'll run on these servers, but these servers are already secure, so that's great. So as a security guy, it'd be really great for me to have more of that experience in the traditional development pipeline. Like, how does all of that work? How do I integrate in with software developers so that I'm part of their process and able to just kind of feed them up an infrastructure that's already secure.
Sure. So what advice would you give to somebody who's considering this type of job?
Besides all of the other stuff about learning and things like that, I'd say if you are the type of person that has trouble unplugging, maybe reconsider, or at least figure out how to unplug. There's a lot of times where I will work, an 8-9 hour, maybe a 10-hour day, and I get to that point where I'm like, there's still so much left to do, and so I have to, at some point, just be able to push back from the desk and say, I'm not going to do any more work. I'm gonna let it sit until tomorrow. It'll wait until tomorrow, and that's really important, because cybersecurity is a constant barrage of information all the time. You've got threats, you've got vulnerabilities, you've got alerts, you've got everything just coming at you constantly, and so it's really, really, really important that you have a good strategy for being able to unplug and unwind, and do something kind of at the end of the day that just refreshes you and helps you keep your sanity.
Sure. So do you have any other additional information or resources that you could suggest to people who are looking to learn more?
If we could have a podcast just on that, man.
Sure.
I'd say, so I mentioned the Discord communities. If you choose any set of Discord communities to join, again, Black Hills Information Security. I'll, full disclosure, I don't do any business with them. So again, this isn't a business plug for them. They're just that great at everything they do. So go find them, go join their Discord communities. The other one that I would suggest is there's a guy, Brian Brake, who's got this security podcast, Breaking Down Security. And he built a community around that. They have a Slack server that they have like 2,000 people in there. And at any given day, on weekends, it's maybe a little less active, but during the business week, there's probably easily 200, 300 different people in there. And they're very, very beginner friendly. Brian himself says, we're all noobs. So if you're a noob to security, like, come join our community. And so that's a really great place. I've learned so much from them, and really credit a lot of my success to the Breaking Down Security podcast and that community, that Slack community.
Sure. So Josh, I've got one final question for you, and that is, if you could step into my shoes as the interviewer for this interview, what would you have asked yourself that I did not?
Sure. Let's talk about recommendations, cybersecurity recommendations. I guess I would ask you, if I was the interviewer, what cybersecurity recommendations do you have for people? And so if you don't know how to use a password manager, go learn how to do that. And if you've got grandma who maybe is, it's hard for her to deal with like a password manager, honestly, best thing for grandma is get her to write down all her passwords in a book and make them long, 16 characters. There's a website out there, xkpassword.net, I think. Let me look it up real quick.
Sure.
Yeah, so xkpasswd.net. What this will do is this will make like a nice long password for you, but it's like 4 words. So like staple battery horse stable or something, something along those lines. And then you have dashes in between there. It's easy for you to write down and remember and type in, but really hard for computers to guess. So if you're working with somebody like grandma who's, it's harder to do that stuff, just get them a book that they can keep next to the computer, and have them have different passwords for their banking, for their social media, stuff like that. That goes a long way to making yourself more secure, making grandma more secure. I'd say the other thing too, we were talking about 2-factor authentication. There is a balance between 2-factor authentication and convenience. And so I really recommend, there's a program out there called Authy that is a 2-factor authentication system, and it does syncing to their main cloud. And so that gives you, there's a little bit of a risk there in terms of if somebody were to gain access to that, they'd be able to collect all your 2-factor auth tokens and things like that. But I think in terms of, people are changing phones frequently enough that I think that's a really good one, where it gives you that additional convenience to be able to have 2-factor authentication without it being stuff like SMS, which has problems. The text message 2-factor has some significant problems.
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to do 2 things today that can make you more secure, if you don't have a password manager, go get a password manager. I use Bitwarden. I think it's great. And then if you're not doing 2-factor authentication, go get Authy and set yourself up with that, so you can have good, convenient 2-factor authentication.
Sure. And I've actually got a question on that. So for your password keychain, is using your own browser as a password keychain is that secure. So if somebody were to use, Chrome's got a password manager. If they have Google or have Chrome remember all their passwords, does that count, or should they get something separate?
Sam, you said you only had one more question for me. Yeah, no, I think the browser is. I think they've been getting better over time. I know the last time I looked, the recommendation was don't use the browser, and part of that is because of how they do encryption and stuff like that. Now I'll be frank with you, I haven't looked at that in like 4 years, so I don't know if they've gotten significantly better since the last time I looked at it. But I know that that if you're using like a plugin, you can get, like I was mentioning with Bitwarden or LastPass or 1Password or a couple other big names. You can get a plugin that just jumps into your browser. And what they do is they do encryption right on your system, and then anything that they upload to the cloud it's already encrypted. So all of the encryption and decryption and all that fancy stuff that they're doing is right there locally on your system, and that's how you want it. So
Sure. All right. Cool. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we kind of wrap things up here?
no, I think we're good.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on to today's podcast. And thank you, everybody in the audience. If you made it this far in the video, that means a lot that you decided to take 90 minutes of your day to watch the entire podcast. So
Yeah,
thank
I'm
you
kind
so
of boring.
much.
So
I would not say that. Yeah, so if you find this content interesting and worth watching, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more. Yeah, leave a comment down below if you have any questions for Josh or any of our other guests. I might do like a Q&A podcast if we get enough questions. Yeah, my social media is all down there too. So yeah, thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you next time.